What's up everyone, my name is Jonathan Farber. I was able to achieve financial freedom at 27 years old through passive income of real estate investing. Welcome to the channel, or welcome back to the channel if you're a repeat watcher. I post videos every week on the latest strategies, trends, real estate topics on creating passive income and productivity. If you get any value from these videos or you're interested in these topics further, please consider giving a like and subscribe. It shows me that these videos help and show which topics I should make more videos about. Before we get started, I gotta shout someone out like I'm doing more. Ben Sternberg, he is just one of the best people I know. He's taken crazy action, joined the Facebook group months ago, then did the mastermind, got a couple properties. Now we own a short-term rental property together, and he's kicked off an amazing wholesale business that's making $5,000 to $10,000 a month consistently. So Ben, you're the man. Thank you for what you do, and let's get into the video. Oh, and if you want a shout out in the next video, drop a comment below and subscribe to the channel, or screenshot the video and tag me on your Instagram story. And timestamps will be in the comments. I know your time is valuable, so let's get to it. All right, not to be doom and gloom, but after this video, my view of the court or legal system is very different. Basically, I had a pretty stressful situation take place involving a seller of a property that got pretty ugly, and I don't want any of you guys to have to deal with something like this in the future if you don't have to. So I'll explain what happened and how you can avoid this. And make sure to stick around until the end, where I explain exactly what I would do differently and what exactly I mean when I say losing faith in the legal system. Okay, so what happened? I was buying a property in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Nothing too crazy there. It was a property I was buying with conventional financing found on the MLS, and the business plan was to go a few times a year, and then when I wasn't there, rent it out to big groups on Airbnb, typically around 16 people. So the issue started when the seller needed a concession of staying in the property for a few weeks after the sale to be ready to then move into their next house, which is not usually a big deal at all. What typically happens in these cases is the seller stays on as a tenant, pays rent that gets paid at the closing or when they move out. And this is something I've done before and haven't had any problems with. I found out after, when this happens, there's usually a deposit from the seller to ensure they take care of the property during their tenancy that the seller gives to a title company or to an attorney to hold until they move out. Sort of like the same way a traditional tenant pays a deposit. I didn't know this because the other time I did it, there was no problem at all. Also, there was a carpet replacement that needed to be done in the property that the seller's cat had kind of ripped up one of the rooms. These were outlined in the closing agreement as shown here. Again, all pretty standard stuff, but as you'll see, things start to unfold and get a little ugly, and it gets a little weird. So the amount of time the seller needed to stay in the property before their new property was ready was an additional 54 days. So in this case, it was credited toward the closing of the property, the amount of $2,612.90 as shown here. Meaning it was paid when the closing took place, which is great actually, because no money needs to change hands or be collected, and it's actually less cash that you can bring to the table as a buyer. This is awesome. Also, an important detail for later, in the contract, it mentioned the price per day if extensions were needed. The cost for additional days after the 54 days was about $100 per day shown here. So the property closes and I start prepping for the seller move out date so we can get the furniture delivered, assembled, and basically just stand the property up. Claire was also coming down to help set up a few properties that week, which was incredible, that were coming live, and we just wanted to knock everything out at the same time. Like we do with everything, we like to batch activities in chunks, just makes things easier. You do it once, don't have to worry about it for a long time. I believe the original exact date the seller was supposed to be out was February 15th. On February 10th, I get text from the seller saying that they're gonna need to be in the property for an additional 13 days to February 28th. At that point, I replied back saying, no problem, but as the contract states, it's $100 per day for the extra days, and I'll pick up the check at move out if that works for them. So to my understanding, the next step was meeting up at the property to get the key, pick up the check, and start moving furniture in. So now to the day of the transfer. Claire and I get to the property to meet the seller, and he was finishing up moving, and we just made a quick intro. It seemed fine until he told me he didn't have the check. Also, when I walked into the property, the room upstairs that the carpet was supposed to be replaced was actually worse than it was originally, meaning it had not been repaired or replaced, nothing had been done. So he said he had to leave to get the check, and when he came back, he was actually really friendly. even apologetic. And he said he forgot about the carpet, but he had someone scheduled to be there in 2 weeks to fix it. Not great, but at least seemed okay. I still personally had doubts. As a mentor used to say constantly, where there's smoke, there's usually fire. Meaning when things start to seem off, they usually are, which makes sense with what happened next. So I have a check in my hand that the guy just gave to me, and I looked down at it, and the amount did not add up. It was half of what it should have been. So I believed that the amount should have been around $1,300, but the check was only for around $600. At that point, I follow up with texts, multiple phone calls, and he isn't responding. Finally, he responds saying that he had to leave town and he'll be back in a couple days. So I really wasn't sure what was going on, if he was trying to get rid of me, if he was just making an accident, but wasn't really sure. So I spoke to a couple lawyer friends and they told me what my options were basically. From a high level, there were two options. Either sue or go to small claims court, or have a lawyer write a letter. A lot of people kept saying that, and that might scare the guy. But at the same time, the same lawyers also told me that this could cost lots of money and lots of time, and it wasn't for that much of an amount. Small claims court could be appealed or dragged out for a long, long time. And while I don't like throwing away money, this wasn't for a huge amount, like I said. It was for about $600 in carpet and material and $700 for the rent that he owed the additional days. Also, at that time, I decided I don't want to deal with this guy anymore to have his people fix the carpet, and I know a couple of vendors in the area, so I thought it would just be easier if the guy could give me the money for the carpet repair that he was going to do, and I'll use one of my people. This became another issue. Now that the seller knew I wanted to have the carpet replaced myself, he started saying he wasn't gonna pay for that since it wasn't his person. Like, what? And now the seller was following back up saying he didn't owe the additional rent because the text exchange showed that I was okay with him staying for the extra 3 days. This again left me thinking, was this really worth it? Would this even lead to a good outcome if I spent all this time and energy thinking about it? So what were the next steps? One, speak to another lawyer. I will leave nameless for this video, but he helped me write a few emails that made a huge difference in communication. Basically, I needed to explain to the seller that the text exchange we had never dismissed the contract and actually only reinforced it. This is when things got even crazier when I was saying this, because the seller sent back a crazy email. I've never had an email like this, going insane, calling me all sorts of names and people involved. It was just wild. Now, this was ultimately over the span of probably about a week, where every day there was something new happening where we thought we were getting it, we didn't think we were getting it, but ultimately there weren't that many options if I wanted to pursue this money. One thing I will also note throughout all this, I sort of started embracing it as a learning and not thinking about it like if I get the money it's a success and if I don't it's not. I sort of started to enjoy the process of just learning about dealing with this guy and the legal things and having lawyers kind of help. And that definitely made the situation way less stressful because either way I would have been happy. I actually think this is a great approach for anything you're taking on in this. While it does suck and it's not fun sometimes to be dealing with new situations, if you take the approach that everything is a learning experience, you'll have way less stress about it, trust me, and that helped me in this situation so much. So what ended up happening in all of this? I'd been attempting to reach out to the seller directly and that just wasn't working. So ultimately we had to go with the threatening of legal action, and at that point he sent back this email, the one that was kind of insane and pretty funny, honestly, if you look at it like neutrally. But one good thing about his email, he did agree to pay. But even after he agreed to send the money, we still have to figure out how to collect it. Essentially, he admitted he was wrong, but then he went dark again. This is where the mercenary, Claire Rosenberg, stepped up. She turned into a full-out bounty hunter, basically where I would give her a chunk of the money if she could gently chase this guy down and find the money. And she hit him and his wife with pretty much every tactic, calling, texting, emailing, and finally it led to him sending a Venmo, which I was completely shocked about. So Claire, I gotta give you a huge shout out. You chase this guy down and you kill them with kindness, which is what you're amazing at. That said, here is what I would do differently. One, the absolute most important thing I would have done differently is required a deposit held with the lawyer for the time that the previous owner lived in the property after the close. Number two, I would have had more communication the weeks leading up to the seller about the move-out date and specifically more clearly what was happening. Sometimes we leave things for interpretation, but as the saying goes, you know what happens when you assume. You make an ass out of yourself. It's cheesy, but it's true. Sometimes you need all the details. Number three, I would have looked at the check in my hand when I met the seller that day. By the time he left, the entire thing started to unwind and he was already gone. He gave me a folded check, and only after I realized that it was the wrong amount. Number 4, I would not ask a seller for repairs anymore. I would ask for a cash credit or a physical check for 2 reasons. 1, it removes the risk of them not doing the work on time, which is what happened here. And 2, it removes the risk of them having the work done poorly or partially. Both those things can lead to big problems. And lastly, things to consider about the legal system that you may have never thought of, but I thought about a lot of these things just because it was my first time in the situation. 1, you don't know if you're gonna win a case. Even if you think it's a guarantee, it's still up to a judge or a jury, and people can be unpredictable. People told me this multiple times throughout the process. 2, it can take a lot of time. Opportunity cost is a crazy concept I'm obsessed with after reading James Clear's articles on the value of time. So beware of that. 3, it may take more money than the issue is even worth. I spoke to a lawyer friend who explained that he had a feud case going on where the cost of the trial was 5 times the amount that they were fighting for. But both sides were stubborn, so they just wanted to keep going. Number 4, even if you win a lot of cases, people don't pay. Number 5, not sure if it actually makes sense for most people who make a decent living to fight any case that's worth less than $20,000. Ultimately, if your time is worth it, you may not be getting a good return on it if you're fighting people in court all the time, unless you're just trying to learn and you really don't have anything else going on. The bottom line, there will always be challenges in real estate. It's not a reason not to get started, but it's definitely important to understand a little bit about the risk and the things that you can do to prevent it before you get started. As always, I appreciate you being here, and if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I will be answering all of them, and if you got any value out of this video, please consider hitting subscribe and throwing a like. That helps me tremendously. Thank you guys, and see you on the next one.